Hello, I am Jyotika. In today's class, I'm going to be solving Section C Research Methods for AQA Psychology A-Levels Paper 2. Please note firstly that I will be solving only Section C of A-Levels and I will be solving it for A-Levels, not for the AS only question paper. As you know, AS only question paper is different. This is meant for the A-level students. This video, though it is meant for AQA board, it should prove to be useful even for Cambridge A-level students CIE who are attempting paper 2 or paper 4 in their exams, or IBDP students who are attempting paper 3 in their HL psychology exam. Okay, so let's begin. In AQA, when we have a research method section for A levels, there is one scenario that is fairly long, but a lot of questions depend on that scenario. So, the first thing we should do is read the scenario very carefully. Let it take as much time as it has to, but don't try to gloss over the scenario and rush to the questions. That is going to make you commit a lot of errors when you come to the questions. So, first read the scenario with utmost attention without worrying about which questions will follow. So, a controlled observation was designed to compare the social behaviors of preschool children of working parents and preschool children of stay at home parents. The sample consisted of 100 children aged 3 who were observed separately. Half of the children had working parents and the other half had stay at home parents. The observation took place in a room which looked like a nursery with a variety of toys available. In the room, there were 4 children and one supervising adult. Their behavior was not recorded. Each child participant was brought into the room and settled by their parent. The parent then left to sit outside. Each child participant's behavior was observed covertly for 5 minutes while they played in the room. The observation was conducted in a controlled environment and a standardized script was used when children and their parents arrived. Okay, now we have the first question. Explain why the researcher used a controlled observation and a standardized script in this study. This is a 4-mark question. They have asked for two things: one, controlled observation; second, standardized script. And it is for 4 marks, meaning that the marks will be equally distributed for justifying both points. That is the first thing we should take note, because how much weightage we give to each of the points depends on the marks that are allotted. Both are equally marked, so we should give equal weightage to both. As a rule of thumb, we should just give 2 sentences for each point because there are 2 marks for each. So, first starting with controlled observation and justifying why it was used. Why type of questions indicate that some strength should be pointed out of using that particular technique. Why something was used? Obviously, because the researcher felt there was strength in that method. So, what we should do is follow the standard format while writing. First point is going to be about why controlled observation was used. So, within that, first we can name a strength of using controlled observation. Then we can link it to this scenario. Second point, we can take up about standardized script, and we can give a strength of that again, and then we can link it to the scenario. So in this way we will have a very organized or systematic way of writing, and we will be able to score 3 marks for each of the sentences that we are making. This is the best way to organize the answer, though it's not the only way. It helps you also not to give unequal weightage to both the points. It keeps you on track, and it also helps the examiners see that you have covered both the points, and it helps from the examiner from getting confused or to have to search where each point is made. There's a lot of clarity in this format. Try to stick to this one. Okay, now how we should think about writing the answer before we write it. What is the strength of controlled observation in general? If we've learned our research methods well, we would know that controlled observation mainly serves the purpose that it literally controls extraneous variables. That is why it is called controlled observation. Now, the question is, in this particular scenario, what are the variables that are being controlled? Why is the research being done specially in a room? Why not just go and see social behaviors of preschool children where they show these behaviors in the preschool itself or in their homes? What is the need to design a special scenario? So we can see what was there in the scenario, what is the feature. There is a room looking like a nursery with a variety of toys in it. So perhaps the researcher wants to see social behaviors with respect to those toys. Those toys seem to be important. Maybe he does not want the type of toys that are available to influence what type of social behavior the children show with other children or with the adults. That is why it is important to arrange the toys in a certain way to or to have a particular selection of toys. So that seems to be what the researcher is controlling for. Perhaps the variety or the number of toys from influencing children's social behavior. I know I shouldn't be discussing for too long, but just to give you a clarity of thought, perhaps the researcher felt that if there are too many toys in the natural preschool of children, then they get too distracted by the toys and he won't be able to see their social behaviors with each other. So rather than conducting the experiment in the preschool itself, he thought it was a good idea to create such a room where they wouldn't be distracted by the type of toys that are there. So that could be one variable that he's aiming to control. The next point, which is there on standardized script. Strength of using a standardized script, that means following some predetermined or some fixed way of going about the observation, is always to create reliability. Just like controlled observation is to enhance validity, standardized scripts are meant to increase reliability. Now, in this scenario, why would we want to standardize the script? For what are we looking into for consistency? Like, in what aspect do we want consistency that we are creating a standardized script? Because we know reliability is all about consistency. So, when children and parents arrived, that is when a standardized script is used. So, we want the children and the parents to consistently behave in a certain way. We don't want different sets of parents and children to behave differently just because different set of instructions is given to them. So, we want to maintain consistency in what we are instructing the parents and the children and what we are asking them to do basically in the observation or whatever we are telling them that the observation is about, so that different participants can get the same idea of what is going to happen in the observation and get the same format of behaving in the environment. Okay, now how do we write these points? Like I said, we should write it systematically. So we can say a controlled observation was used to control for the influence of extraneous variables, thereby increasing the validity of results. For example, perhaps the researcher wanted to prevent the number or nature of toys available from influencing the social behavior of the children. A standardized script was used to increase reliability of findings. Parents and children would get consistent instructions and treatment from the researcher with its help. Okay, let's look at the next question, which is from the same scenario. Identify one limitation of controlled observations. This is for 1 mark. The command term is identify, and the marks allotted are just one, which clearly indicates that we just have to name one limitation. We do not even need to link it to the scenario. So, no elaboration is required. What we have to do is just see that they've asked for controlled observation and think in general what is one limitation. We know that controlled observations are done in artificial settings. They are not done in naturalistic settings. In fact, they are the converse of naturalistic observation. So, the very weakness is that what is a strength in naturalistic observation? Ecological validity. So, this is the only thing we have to name as the limitation. How we should write is one limitation is that they reduce the ecological validity of results obtained. Let's look at the next question, which is also from the same scenario. The researcher used two trained observers to record the social behaviors of each child during the observation. Give two behavioral categories that the observers could have used in the observation to assess preschool children's social behavior. Explain why your chosen categories are appropriate. Unfortunately, when they say behavioral categories, what they mean is simply behaviors. Actually, behavioral category should be about a collection of behaviors, but they just mean behaviors when it comes to the AQA paper. So, literally, we just have to give two examples of behaviors that would indicate whether children are behaving social or not. So, any gestures, any facial expressions, any words that they use, which should be observable. Don't say things like children are thinking something in their mind. The researcher cannot know what children are thinking in their mind. So read the question carefully. It's about observation. It's not about a self report. Okay, so some facial features which are commonly seen when anybody, children or adults, are acting socially is smiling. That's the one which typically comes to mind and it's easily identified. Another example, which is the opposite, is frowning. When children are unhappy with each other during social interaction, they might just frown. Other possibilities are saying hello to each other, speaking to each other for a long time, things like that. Anything that the researcher can see, hear, sense in some way, that should be a part of observation. For now, for my two behavioral categories, I am taking smiling and frowning. Now, I also have to justify why my categories are appropriate. Categories. They have not said why each category is appropriate. So, overall, I can give some reason. Also, they have not specified how many reasons I need to give. Like, do I need to give two reasons or one reason will suffice? Because it is allocated 4 marks, what I will do is I know I'm going to get 1 mark for each behavioral category. So, 2 marks are covered over there. The remaining 2 marks, I will name one Strength, like I said, why questions about strengths. So I will name one strength of my behavioral categories for another mark, and for the last mark I will just elaborate on it and link it to the scenario given. So like that I will cover my 4 marks. Let's see how to write the answer. What we can write is, one behavioral category could have been, I draw as much wording from the question as possible. That helps me to keep my answers clear. So could have been smiling at a child or adult. Another could be frowning at a child or adult. Now, I have to justify. There are many possible justifications I can give. One I can give is they are mutually exclusive, or they are not overlapping in any ways, like they are clearly distinctive, and so the researcher won't get confused between them. Another strength I can give is that they are easily observable, they are readily observable, and somewhere that mutually exclusive point will come that the researcher won't confuse the two. So, one thing is they manifest outwardly, or the researcher is able to see them clearly. That is very true, and the two I'm combining together. So, I also need to speak of them in relation with each other, that the both cannot get confused with each other. So, how I will put it is, these categories are appropriate because firstly, they are easy for direct observation. Secondly, they are clearly distinguishable from each other. So, here what I have done is, I have just said generally. Now, this is something that is applicable to any study. Now, combining the points and relating it with the scenario which is given, that is, smiling or frowning is directly visible on the faces of children, and these expressions are so different from each other that the researcher is unlikely to confuse between them. Okay, so that is for that answer. Let us look at the next question. Describe how the observers could use time sampling to record the social behavior of each child during the 5-minute period. The very important thing here is to note what is being asked. It is how, not why. Sometimes the question would be, why is time sampling used? In that case, we would give some strengths of time sampling. So some students make that mistake. They start talking about strengths of time sampling, that they start evaluating it. How means you have to give the procedure. You have to say step by step what should be done if the researcher wants to do time sampling. This is for 4 marks. Time sampling, as you know, is a structured observational method. So, how that can be applied in this scenario, we have to give stepwise. The most important thing is to maintain a sequence. All I am saying, give it systematically so that it's very clear and easy to follow for the examiner. Don't confuse what is being done. So don't give the last phase first and the first phase last. Just be very clear in order, and also mention very specifically, use specific numbers like specific timings or specific counts when you're answering. Don't leave anything vague or ambiguous when you're writing. Okay, so what comes to my mind when it is about time sampling is, firstly, what the observer should do, he should have a checklist that is ready with him. It starts with that, with the preparation of a checklist. Because if there is no checklist, what will the researcher observe? Then the researcher needs to decide, because it's time sampling after all, what are the intervals at which he will be recording the behaviors which are there on the checklist. When I'm making the outline, I'm just giving a line of thinking. I am not specifying in the outline how it has to be done, but it is understood. When we are writing, I will show that when we are thinking about the checklist, for example, we have to think about which behaviors will come under the checklist. At least two or three examples we should be able to give. Then, when we are talking about intervals, we have to be very specific what those intervals are going to be. For example, one more thing is, students would ask how to decide what should be the interval duration. You can refer to some of the studies that you've seen in your syllabus to get an idea. After all, you should draw knowledge from the studies. So you've seen Bandura's study. In that, there used to be a 5-second interval for time sampling. So you can take that as an inspiration. You could also point out to 5 seconds. Also, some caution has to be taken while doing the sampling. So we should just mention that also, that as the researcher is recording, what he should not do, just like we are saying how he should do, it means what he should do, we should also point out to what he should not do. So anything that is out of the sampling frame, he should definitely not record that. Only what is within the frame he should do that. And then the total duration can be mentioned for how long he is going to keep on recording this way. So like this we can explain the time sampling procedure. So again, I'm just going to write down proper answer to show you exactly how it is to be written. So what we can write is, the observers can prepare a common checklist of behaviors to be observed, such as, okay, I'm going to give the same examples that I have given in the behavioral category answer, because there's no need to give anything else, such as smiling towards a child or adult, frowning at a child or adult, etc. Now, I cannot just say that they should start observing. There's to be clarity. They should start observing means what? Are they going to do it together and mark the checklist? No, I want them to do it independently. So then is a very good term here, because it shows one after the other what is happening. So then each observer can take a copy of the checklist and independently observe the behaviors of each child. They can set a duration of 5 seconds for each interval for marking of the behaviors shown by the children, shown by the child Okay, so here it's important, like I've marked also, marking off the behaviors, because another possibility is they could be rating the behaviors somehow. So supposing they're giving a rating from 1 to 5 or 0 to 4 or something for each behavior that the child is performing, then we need to mention that. Right now I'm not taking that as an element, because the focus is not only on how they are marking on the checklist. If that was a specific question, I could have elaborated. Here it is a longer question, how the time sampling should be done, and only one step in that is how they would be marking on the checklist. So for simplicity, not to complicate matters and not to take away from the main question, I'm simply saying that they'll mark off the behavior shown by each child. In total, the researchers can keep marking the behaviors in this way for the entire 5-minute period, being careful not to mark any behaviors shown in between the intervals. Okay, so this is how we can present this answer. Let's move on towards the next question. Explain one strength and one limitation of using time sampling for this observation. Time sampling has a very obvious strength of standardization, as we have learned. So, just to revise, time sampling has a very fixed procedure or a predetermined procedure. So, that definitely is its strength. And if we relate it to this scenario, everything is very going to be very fixed, although they have not mentioned, we have mentioned. But we know that the time intervals in which the social behaviors are recorded, the total duration for which the recording will be done, how the recording will be written down by the two observers, each of that is very fixed, and standardization increases reliability. So, that is what we will present as a strength. In terms of weakness, time sampling has the weakness that we have to record behaviors only within time frames, or we can say within the stipulated intervals. We cannot record any behavior that occurs between the intervals, so outside of the time frame. That means we can lose out on potentially helpful behavior, either some additional behaviors that we could have noted down, we missed out on them, or we miss out on the context of certain behaviors. I know I shouldn't be elaborating too much, but just to get the point across. For example, I am noting whether children smile at other children or at an adult or not. What if by the time I'm noting the behavior in one time frame or one interval, the child stops smiling, which is an indication that he was just showing a formal or a social smile and not really smiling because he was happy? Because that type of a smile would have lasted for longer. So, that context or that relevant information I have lost out, because I am very fixed on writing whatever is coming within the interval or the time frame, such that I'm noticing, I'm ignoring anything that is coming in between. I'll write this down properly and show, as always. Only one thing, before I write down the answer, I forgot to explain how the marks will be allotted. It is very similar to previous questions. Total number of marks are 4, and there are two things that they have asked for: one strength and one limitation. So, definitely, marks get equally distributed between the strength and the limitation. And the format of answering we can retain. Like, first, I will name one strength, then I'll link it to the study. Then I will name one weakness and I will link it to the study. This way it remains organized. We also remain in the correct track of answering, and the examiner will also know, will also have no difficulty in reading the answer. When I say link, I mean we have to use wording from the text while answering. If they just wanted to know generally what is the strength and weakness of time sampling, they would have asked us directly, like an AO1 question. Why have they asked it as AO2? Why have they given a whole scenario and then asked with reference to that? Because they want us to refer to that scenario while answering, or to use wording from that scenario and answer. So make sure you do that, because that is where most students lose marks. Okay, so now I'll write a model answer. One strength is that the method is highly standardized, which improves the reliability of findings. So this is generally, I have just stated what is a strength, but I haven't linked it. So now I will link it or refer it to the scenario that has been given. So for example, the recording will be done at fixed time intervals for a fixed total duration, maintaining consistency in recording social behavior of each child. Okay, now I'll come to the next point. However, one weakness is that any behavior not within the interval of recording will go unnoticed. So it will go unrecorded, limiting the scope of findings. For example, if a child shows a social behavior like smiling as the observer is noting down behavior from an interval, this smiling will not be recorded. Okay, let's look at the next question. Explain how reliability of controlled observation could be assessed through inter-rater reliability. Once again, the key term is how, and it's not why. Why we should do inter-rater reliability is not the question. So we have to give a systematic procedure of how it can be calculated. We know there are two observers. We can state that again. Inter-rater reliability means two observers will have to cross-check their observations with each other. So initially, both will have to do independent observation using the same checklist. Otherwise, they won't have any basis for comparison if they're using different checklists or if they're doing spontaneous recording. So first they'll have to independently observe, mark their individual checklists. Then they will have to verify with each other. Now many students in inter-rater reliability type of question, they stop over here, which is a mistake. You have to explain how it could be assessed, meaning how it will be calculated as well. So the way of calculating is to determine the correlation. Correlation coefficient will be calculated between the data analyzed by one observer and the data analyzed by the other observer. That needs to be mentioned. And then, of course, how that coefficient will be interpreted. That also needs to be mentioned. So, if the coefficient is positive and it is large, then it will be taken that there is high inter-rater reliability, or that the controlled observation is reliable. But if the correlation is small, then it will be taken as there is a disagreement between the raters and the observation is not very reliable. We need to explain right from how it will be done initially to how the final interpretation will be done. Nothing should be missing in the process, so it has to be complete. There are some standard rules also, such as if the final resulting coefficient is plus 0.8 or greater, that indicates that inter-rater reliability is high. But I do not find it necessary to state that, so I do not as such suggest that you should remember any number. If you do, if you remember the coefficient, that's really good. But without remembering the coefficient also, we can give the analysis interpretation. So I will be giving that. Okay, let's see how to write the answer. So we can write two independent observers will mark the social behaviors. Okay, note how I keep using wording from the scenario while I'm answering so that it's relevant. Of children on their respective checklists. Okay, now just marking does not produce quantitative data, and for correlation coefficient, we need quantitative data. So we'll mention again, I use the term then, that is very helpful. Then they will score their checklists by assigning numbers such as 1 for every behavior marked and 0 for every behavior not marked. Then they will compare their checklists with each other by calculating the correlation coefficient across their sets of scores. If the coefficient turns out to be positive and large, it will be concluded that the reliability of the controlled observation is high. Okay, so think from the examiner's point of view when they write, is it clear to them? So you can reread your answer. You can read your answer and you can check whether there's clarity or not. For someone who doesn't know how inter-rater reliability is calculated, will they be able to understand? Or are there some gaps in understanding the answer? Something is unclear in between, some step seems to be missing. Just check that by reading it once. Yes, I'm reading out the question first. The data from the observation was summarized by converting the number of agreed observations into a total social behavior score for each child. The researcher then conducted a statistical test to identify whether there was a significant difference between the social behavior scores for children of stay at home parents and those of working parents. Identify an appropriate statistical test that the researcher could use to analyze the social behavior scores in this study. Explain. Command term is explain, not just state. So, explain three reasons for your choice in the context of this study. The researcher wants to see whether there was a significant difference. Significance can be determined only by an inferential statistical test. Descriptive statistical tests cannot inform us about significant differences or population differences. So that means we will have to use the Mann-Whitney U test, which is there in our syllabus. We have to give three reasons for why we would use the Mann-Whitney U test. Before I come to those reasons, you can know that even if you were to say that the T test should be used, although it is not covered in the syllabus particularly, still it would be marked as correct. So that option is there, but it's best to stick to what is there. Now, 7 marks are there, and three reasons have been asked for. Identifying the appropriate statistical test will give me 1 mark. Naming three reasons will give me 3 marks. 1 mark for each reason that I state or name. The remaining 3 marks will come from justification or explanation of each of the reasons I am giving. That is why looking at the command term is so very important. While writing the answer, you will understand what points I'm covering, but just to quickly give an outline, one strength, one reason for using Mann-Whitney test is definitely the type of data which is there. This data is not on interval scale, or it is on ordinal scale because it has been converted from observation into scores. So one reason is ordinal scale. When I will write with the explanation. It is a social behavior score. It's definitely not on interval data. There are not equal gaps in the scores because it's not a mathematical type of quantification. Okay, more on that I will write with relevance to the scenario. Besides that, we know there are two groups, two separate groups, or we can technically say there is an independent groups design which has been used. So that is one more reason for doing Mann-Whitney U-test, and of course to relate it to the scenario, I have to name the groups which are there in the scenario. That justifies independent measures design. Another reason is it is not correlation. Otherwise, we would have to do something like Pearson's correlation test or Spearman's row test. Rather, it is a test of difference in the social behaviors. That they have made very clear. So, for differences, Mann-Whitney U test is there. These are the reasons for using the test. I cannot think of any other. So, these are the three reasons that we will stick by. Okay, so first I will name. Again, organization is such, whatever they have asked first, answer that first and answer in accordance with the command term. They have not asked you to explain what is a Mann-Whitney U test, so just name the test. So we can write an appropriate wording I'm using from the question itself. Statistical test would be the Mann-Whitney U test. In this syllabus, even if you write Mann-Whitney test, it is considered as correct. One reason is that the collected data is on an ordinal scale. Okay, till here I get 1 mark, but where is the linking or where is the use of wording from the scenario? So I will write that the data is made of social behavior scores which are merely observed and rated. That's all I need to justify you. The next point I can give is another reason is that two separate groups are being compared. That is, the social behavior scores of children of stay at home parents are being compared with those of working parents. I've used quotation marks to differentiate the two groups and to show that I've named the two groups. Other possibilities are you can say group 1 and group 2, but just make it clear which are the two groups. And another reason is that we are comparing differences. So, another reason is that differences are being compared across the groups. That is, how different the social behavior scores are of stay at home parents, stay at home group. Because I've named it before, I can just call it stay at home group, and working parents group are being compared. If I want, I can add that line for more clarity. This is optional. No relationship for correlation is being observed, is being analyzed. Just to make it clear why I'm emphasizing on difference, so I say that correlation is not being studied. That, like I said, is optional. Extra space I do not require. If you're explaining at length, you can use the extra space. For now, I'm coming to the next question, which is explain one reason why collecting quantitative data in this study would reduce validity. When it comes to quantitative, qualitative data and validity, students are only able to think about objectivity. And quantitative data, they never see as reducing validity, but it does because it lacks contextual details. That is very important to mention. It's just for 2 marks. So, first we'll state the reason contextual details are missing, and then, as always, we will link it to the study by giving examples of which type of contextual details can be important. This I have discussed in the previous answer, also, I have touched upon it when it came to how the observation should be done, time sampling. So, that time, contextual details we saw, like if someone is smiling, is that a real smile, a genuine one indicating happiness, or is it just social smiling? So that context is important to understand whether it's truly a social behavior or not. That is what we need to explain. Okay, so first thing I would state is collective quantitative data would not allow understanding of contextual details of social behavior. For example, whether a smile of a child is social or authentic would be difficult to determine. If you feel social word creates confusion in the sense of social behavior, you can just say formal or official or something like that you can mention. Okay, the next question which is there, it is little bit, you might feel it's a little out of psychology, but still there's no harm in answering. I mean, it shouldn't be difficult to answer. The findings of this study might have implications for the economy. Economy, as we know, has anything to do with the nation's finance. Explain one or more possible implications of this study for the economy. Implication just means practical relevance. They've said one or more and they've given 3 marks. I would like to give two, though the distribution is not very clear over here because 3 marks are there. It can be 1 point and elaboration. In fact, okay, I think that is better. Instead of giving 2 points, I will state 1 point, elaborate on it, and elaborate further. Ideally, this should have been for 2 marks. That would have been more clear cut. But right now, this is what I'll do. What comes to my mind is the implication for economy is whether parents will work or not after reading the findings of this study. Because this study's results are going to show either that for social behavior of children, parents should stay at home or they should be working. It's going to take one side at the end. Whatever the result comes will have an implication. Because if the result shows that parents should stay at home, then parents who are working and have taken a break for their child, they would not go back for work soon. Then they would feel that they should be staying at home because that is what the study is telling for the social benefit of their children. Then that would harm the economy because working force will be lost. But if it suggests that working parents are better when it comes to social behavior, then they would go to work early and that would in fact improve the economy. So I will state the point first and then I'll show both sides. So that will be like 3 points and it will be adequate for 3 marks. Let's write this. So one implication is of parents returning to the workforce impacting the economy. If the results show that stay at home parents improve children's work social behavior, that would encourage them to return to work. I'm sorry, to not return to work. Having a negative consequence on the economy, or we can say negatively impacting the economy. If the result is the opposite, parents would return to work soon, benefiting the economy. Next question is, the study was written as a scientific report. Describe features of the abstract section in a scientific report. They've asked describe features. This is a typical AO1 question. It does not have to be related to the scenario. They've not asked. They have just said in general they want the features of abstract section. So we can give any 3 points and they just want us to describe, not explain. So we can just state 3 points but in complete sentences of what all is there in the abstract section. One thing is abstract section is a summary. That is the first thing that comes to mind. It summarizes the aim, procedure, and results and conclusion of the study. Another thing that comes to mind is that it's written at the end of conducting a study, but in the report it is always presented as the very first section which is there. And another thing that comes to mind is that it has to be written very briefly because it's a summary. So it cannot have everything in the report in details. It is just a gist or the broad details of what is there in the report. So that is an abstract. Other possible points are it informs the readers what the study is about, and then they can decide whether they want to read the whole study or not. Also, it can include keywords which can make it easier to search for certain scientific results or publications. So these are the features coming to my mind right now. You might have learned many more in your course book. So you can write anything from there. Right now I'm just picking 3 features. So I would start with the abstract section. Includes a summary of the aim, procedure, findings and conclusion of a study. It is presented first as the first section of a research report. It is written very briefly, including only the broad details of each section of the report. Okay, then finally we have the main question which is for 12 marks. Before I read this scenario, I want you to know the distribution of marks for these 12 marker designer study type of questions. For AQA board, they are split into AO2 6 marks and AO3 6 marks. That means we have to evaluate. In other boards, we have separate questions for evaluation of for AO3, but in AQA, they are both rolled into one. So just keep in mind that your answer must include strengths and weaknesses of any elements that you are using, and it should be balanced with that respect. More I'll speak about it as we go ahead to the specific scenario. Let me read it out first. A new TV program has been developed to increase positive social behaviors in preschool children. There is a proposal to carry out an experiment to compare the effects of the new TV program and an existing TV program on positive social behaviors in preschool children. A sample of 500 preschool children and their parents is available for the experiment. The parents have given consent for their children to take part in this experiment. The experiment will take place over an 8-week period. Data on the children's social behaviors will be gathered from the parents using a self report method. Design the experiment to investigate whether watching the new TV program leads to an increase in positive social behaviors in the children compared with watching the existing TV program. In your answer, you will gain credit for providing appropriate details of the following. Firstly, the type of experimental design with justification. A self-report method of data collection with justification. How to control one extraneous variable with justification as to why this would need to be controlled. Justification, why it would be needed to be done, like strengths, actually they need not specify, it's understood. Still, to make the question easier to understand for us, they have been very specific. So we must make sure that these mandatory details, these are not optional, we must include them in the answer. Besides, it's a complete 12 marker. These cannot be the only elements or the only details we have. After all, we have to design the entire experiment. So, in the flow of designing the experiment, these elements should be incorporated into the design. Firstly, we can plan answer in this space, and I strongly recommend that we do plan. Otherwise, students just start off spontaneously with any design and then they get stuck midway when they're answering. So, the better approach is to plan it out broadly and then only start specifying in the answer. Any experiment must begin with an aim. The aim is directly taken from the question and it must be phrased as to investigate something. Then it must continue into a hypothesis. To write a nice directional or non directional for that matter, but operationalized hypothesis, it is important that we know which IV and which DV specifically, or in measurement terms, in operational terms, we are measuring. So we should write the hypothesis next, but for our own facilitation of writing the hypothesis, first we should just think of what exactly is a IV and DV. IV is very clear. It is, as we have seen, the type of TV program that the children are watching, the novelty or the type I would take for now. So either it's an old TV program or a new one. That is clearly given. Not only that, it has been operationalized in terms of that they will have to watch that program over an 8-week period. So we don't have any contribution here. It's not an element that we need to design per se. It's already given in the question. We've just identified it. The dependent variable has to be in terms of self-report. That has been emphasized. Self-report, it's up to us, but what I would recommend, rather than using an interview or any qualitative technique for that matter, like even on a questionnaire having qualitative answers, it would be much more helpful to have quantitative answers. So I would suggest a questionnaire with closed questions and preferably quantitative questions as well. So the dependent variable would be responses of parents, of course, on the questionnaire. Asking about social behaviors of children. This section is not marked what we are planning, so we need not worry about what we are writing. We can write anyhow. Okay, now this is the dependent variable when it's operationalized. Because I'm going to make it fully a closed questionnaire, I'm going to take something like mean scores obtained on the questionnaire. So that is what is coming to my mind. So my hypothesis will be accordingly, and whether it should be directional or non-directional, the program has been made only to increase positive social behaviors. That is explicitly stated. So directional hypothesis would be very suitable over here, because we can expect that the mean positive social behaviors in children will increase after watching this new program rather than watching the existing program. So again, I'm not writing it fully, but when I write there, I will write about mean scores on questionnaire will be higher for those watching new TV program rather than those watching the existing TV program. Besides that, any experiment must have certain controls and standardization in place. Controls, in fact, has been asked compulsorily also in the question. They've asked for any one, we can give more. In this type of a study, definitely one control that comes to mind is children not watching other TV programs which are also based on social behaviors, because that can confound results. Like we would assume because of watching this particular program they're showing positive or negative behaviors, whereas in reality there would be some other program that they're watching which is influencing them. That can be a possibility. It is difficult to control that as such, but because we have parents in our confidence, like parents are also a part of the study. If we read the question, they have recruited preschool children and their parents, so we can instruct the parents to make sure that their children do not watch any social behavior related program. Only that creates another issue, that the parents then, while answering the questionnaire, they could be biased because they would understand the purpose of the study. So rather than instructing them directly not to allow their children to watch programs with social behaviors as such, we can give them a list of programs which are currently on air on television and request them not to let their children watch those certain programs. That is a variable which comes to my mind. Why it would be important to control that variable is, of course, because validity. Extraneous variables are always controlled with respect to validity, and I've already explained when I was talking about why this control is important, because otherwise it will be the other programs which are which viewing of which is confounding results. So that comes to my mind. Another thing, if I think of other variables that can be controlled, of course, the deception type which helps to control demand characteristics, in the sense not letting the parents nor the children know the purpose of the study, those are standard type of variables that can be controlled. For extraneous variables, do not take participant variables. In certain syllabi, participant variables are also taken under extraneous variables, but in AQA, it's generally the situational variables which are taken here. So, to be safe, we'll make sure in the situation there is nothing that can confound children's behavior. There's not much we can control in a longitudinal design. There can be many other things why they would be positive or negative in social behaviors, but at least program watching we can control. So, I would take that as a variable. As I said, experiments should also be standardized. So we have two different groups. How we can standardize their procedures is we can instruct them to watch television for the same duration every day. So regardless of which program they are watching, they should be watching it for the same duration, same number of times in a week, for example, or in a day, something like that. And we can request parents to make sure in either group that they watch the entire program. So we make sure that every child is watching the entire program and not shifting away here and there while the program is on. So there should be no inconsistency in how or how much the children are watching the program. That would count for standardization. Besides that, experiments always have a design, and here it is there in the question also that we have to suggest the design. Independent groups design is ideal according to me. Why I would how I would explain that, or how I would justify that, is because having the same children watch both the programs is little complicated here, because we would need some type of a big break between when they're watching the existing program and the new program, in the sense that otherwise the impact on them could be very mixed of both the programs, like which is influencing which behavior. In a sense, it does help in comparison to see which program is more influential, because we'll assume the end behavior is because of that program. But I feel that really complicates results, so I would prefer independent groups design. I don't need to give a strength of why it is beneficial to have independent groups design. That is not a requirement. Like we can see, they've just asked for justification, so I can justify by saying that there are going to be two different groups of children watching two different programs. Also, for the self report, I've already mentioned that I would like to have a questionnaire, and to further think about it, like how it would be presented, because they've asked us to detail on it and give justification why we are using that particular type. So I will give any three examples of questions I would ask that makes it very explicit. So while writing, I will give those examples. As to justification why, questionnaire only I want to use, as I've already mentioned. It helps collect quantitative data which will give direct and objective comparison across the two groups of children and help us do a statistical analysis and determine actually who has been showing more positive social behaviors. So, because of the objectivity and statistical analysis, I give preference to quantitative type of data which is available on questionnaires. There can be other reasons also, like with the help of questionnaires, we have so many children, like we have 500 children, and it becomes quick to collect data from so many of them, and all such practical aspects are also there. And of course, while designing the questionnaire, we can incorporate certain features like filler questions, which would help to decrease social desirability bias. So, those trends or those justifications, as and when they come up, I will keep on presenting them. And of course, any experiment should conclude with data analysis. I have messed up here in the space to plan, but I have gone step by step. So, if you see my video from beginning to end, that is the structure I plan to follow. So, data analysis would include, of course, comparing the groups, and if the hypothesis is supported, then we can interpret that indeed the new television program is effective in increasing positive social behavior. So, that is how we would conclude. What I have not included in this plan is one sampling details, because the sample number is pre-specified and they're saying that they're already available. So it seems like it's because of convenience sampling. They don't want us to think about the technique or the sample, so I'm not including any details. The sample is already there. Otherwise, usually we do talk about sampling also. Besides that, mm, we can also mention, when we talk of independent groups design, the random allocation that would be done of the children. Random allocation or random assignment just comes along with the design of the study, so it can be mentioned right there. If it is repeated measures design, we can introduce some type of counterbalancing on different weeks. Perhaps children would watch some program at different times. That is provided, of course, if a repeated broadcast is available or not, because I assume they are watching it directly on television. So those things can be considered in case of repeated measures design. One more design which is possible is matched pairs design, and matched pairs could include having some type of testing of children's social behaviors before we allocate them to different groups, and then on the basis of that testing, how much they already stand on social behaviors, we make sure that both groups have equal representation of children with already existing positive and negative social behaviors. Besides this, one last thing before I start actually writing is that they always specify in the criteria, marking criteria, that our answers should be practical. So don't write anything which is very unrealistic, like having children come to the laboratory every day and watch television and all. That becomes impractical. So best to have them in their homes only. In fact, we don't even need to elaborate much on that. Settings of the experiment, or which type it is, laboratory, uh, field experiment, because it's not a very important part of this experiment. There's a logical flow even without discussing those things, so we can just avoid unnecessary details which can create trouble later on. Okay, let's begin with the writing. I would start off with the aim of the experiment is to investigate whether watching a new television program leads to an increase in positive social behaviors of children. A directional hypothesis is proposed stating the mean recall the mean ratings of social behavior by parents will be significantly higher for children watching the new TV program for the 8-week period compared to children watching the existing TV program. Students forget to mention compared to which condition of the experiment. That's not how hypotheses are written. Comparison should be understood very clearly with the help of experimental hypothesis. Okay, so I've given the aim and hypothesis. Now I proceed to the independent and dependent variables. The independent variable is manipulated as type of TV program watched at two levels: new TV program and old TV program. The operationalized dependent variable is the mean ratings on social behavior scale. The experimental design is an independent group's design as two separate groups will be created. One, 250 children watching the new TV program. Two, 250 children watching the old TV program. This will prevent order effects such as fatigue from occurring Okay, so this is where we get into AO3. AO3 is very important. As I said, it has equal weightage. So now I will talk about order effects. For example, the television program that airs later in the day might be paid less attention to by children as they would be tired from having watched the program that airs earlier. Then their fatigue would confound the attention they pay to the later program, reducing its impact on their social behavior and thereby reducing validity of results. As I mentioned previously, it isn't compulsory that you have to evaluate this feature only, but you do have to include evaluation from time to time. Make sure you evaluate at least 3 elements so that it can justify the 6 marks that you are getting for AO3. So these are the best places to evaluate, and in fact, what is stated in the paper as elements that have to only be included, those are very good points for evaluation. Coming to controls and standardization, standardization would be maintained such that parents would be asked to assure that their children watch their respective TV program for its complete duration without moving away. This would introduce consistency to the watching of television by all children, increasing reliability of results. For control, parents would be instructed to not allow their children to watch similar types of TV programs on social behavior for the 8-week period of this study. Specifically, a list of TV programs that their children shouldn't watch would be handed over to them in writing without explaining why the prohibition is being done. This would prevent watching of other programs from becoming the reason for children showing certain social behaviors rather than the planned programs. Increasing validity. Additionally, parents would not develop any expectations about how their children should behave, reducing bias in their later ratings. Parents would be made to answer a questionnaire comprising entirely of closed questions once the study is completed. Examples of these questions include: does your child greet other children when he meets them? Rate on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 meaning hardly ever, to 5 meaning nearly always. Does your child smile at other children Does your child shake hands with children whom he meets for the first time, etc.? The same rating scale mentioned earlier would be used to answer all questions. Parents will be instructed to think back to the past 8 weeks while answering these questions. This type of questionnaire is selected to collect quantitative data as the ratings will be converted to scores of the same value. It will then be possible to calculate mean scores for each group after totaling the scores for each child. Additionally, filler questions such as, does your child eat healthy food easily? Does your child go outdoors to play, etc. will be asked so that parents do not understand that their children's social behavior is being evaluated. This will prevent them from giving unnecessarily favorable ratings to their children, reducing social desirability bias and increasing validity. Finally, data analysis will be performed by comparing, by objectively comparing the mean scores obtained by the two groups. The questionnaires are designed in a way that higher the scores, greater are the positive social behaviors shown by the child. Therefore, if higher mean ratings are achieved by the group watching the new TV program, it will be concluded that it is effective in increasing positive social behaviors in children. Okay, now I anticipate some questions in the comment section of this video. So I would like to answer them beforely so that we don't have to go through the whole process of commenting and answering. One, isn't the answer very lengthy? The answer is not very lengthy because, as I have told you, the number of answers, the evaluation points that I'm writing are exceeding the number of points required in the paper, which are roughly 3. That is why it looks lengthy. It is not lengthy. When you write the answer, you will be able to condense it according to which points you are covering. Besides that, is it required that we cover till the end of the paper? It is just a coincidence that my answer has reached the end of the paper, as I have already mentioned, because I am covering extra points. That is why. Is it important to cover all the elements besides the ones which are given? No. But like I said, that is my style of designing an experiment, because then only it makes logical sense to me and I expect it will make to the examiner. You are the best judge of which elements you think are important. You are the best judge of reading your own answer and checking whether it makes sense to a person who is reading it for the first time or not. Whatever answers I give are just model or sample answers. They are not some ultimate answers which have to only be written in the paper. Besides that, another question that is likely to come up is, isn't it too time consuming to write these answers? Number one, when I write these answers, I'm explaining a lot of things with you even as I write. That takes more time to me. I'm writing on the screen which I'm uncomfortable writing with. That is why also it takes more time. So that is why it's taking me a fair amount of time to write the answers. It shouldn't take you that much time to write. And by the time you reach your exam hall, you should have practiced so much of writing answers that you should be able to write them very quickly. If you're struggling with writing your answer, if you're taking too much time because you don't know which elements to cover, you don't know how an experiment is structured and all, that is a fault of lack of practice on your part and not the time that is being allocated by the board. Being slow in writing answers is almost always a result of students not practicing enough. So I don't take those type of questions as being very correct. Like, I don't know how to phrase it right now, but those type of questions are actually essentially wrong. That isn't the time given by the board not enough, or should we write so much considering the time given? The board has thought out very well before deciding how much time should be allocated to the paper. So that should not be a concern at all to begin with. Okay, so this is my answer for the 12 marker. My videos are aimed more towards helping you understand how to write rather than writing the answers. As far as writing ready made answers is concerned, there are a number of sites and books from where you can get those, and they don't help much in my opinion, because what is more important is to understand how to think about the answer. No matter how many answers you try to memorize or you have readily available on the sites or books, the question that comes is always going to be a novel one. So what is more important is learning the technique of how to write answers, and that takes time. That's why my videos are lengthy. Okay, so I hope that answers most of your questions. If you still have any, please ask in the comment section below. Do not message me on my personal number. Do not email me on my personal ID asking about questions about this video. The comment section is meant for that. You're not to contact me personally and ask me about things in the video. My number and my email ID, for what purpose I am giving, for that purpose you can contact me on that number or ID, not for questions relating to the video. I want to make this very clear, because I will not respond to such questions which are asked through the wrong channel. Okay, that is it for this video. I hope to meet you soon again in another video. Thanks for watching.